If you'd asked me a year ago, I'd have said my life was a masterpiece of structural engineering. My name is Mark, and for 8 years, I thought I had it all figured out. I saw my life in blueprints, in load-bearing walls and solid foundations. I had a thriving business I'd built from the ground up, a beautiful home in a suburb where the trees were older than the houses, and a marriage to Elena, a woman I adored. We were, I believed, a perfectly designed structure, built to last. We were the kind of couple people envied, our life a carefully curated photograph of modern success. Elena was everything I admired, ambitious, whip-smart, and possessed of a charisma that could bend a room to her will. She was a marketing manager at a well-known firm, and she carried herself with the unshakable confidence of someone who knew exactly what she wanted from life and had a 5-point plan to get it. Together, we were a team, a power couple in our own small, comfortable world. In the early days of our marriage, we were unstoppable. The blueprints we drew together were for a shared future, and we laid the foundation brick by brick. We supported each other through the inevitable thin patches, celebrating every small victory and weathering every setback. I'd be up until 3 a.m., the blue light of my monitor painting my face, tweaking a presentation for a big client, and she would appear like a ghost in the doorway with a fresh cup of coffee, her quiet encouragement a buttress against my own self-doubt. She'd come home after a grueling day at the office, her shoulders tight with the stress of corporate politics, and I'd have dinner waiting, eager to hear about her battles. I was her confidant, her strategist, her safe harbor. We were a closed circuit, a self-sustaining ecosystem of mutual support and ambition. The architecture of our life together felt sound, impenetrable. We were earthquake-proof. But the thing about foundations is that the most dangerous damage often happens where you can't see it. It starts as a hairline fracture, a tiny, insignificant crack born of subtle shifts in pressure. And if you're not paying attention, that crack can spread, silently and insidiously, until the day you wake up and find the entire structure groaning under its own weight, ready to collapse. The balance began to shift so subtly that I didn't even register it as a change. It was just life. Elena's job, which had always been demanding, became all-consuming. Her firm was expanding, and she was at the forefront of the charge. The long hours became longer, the weekend work sessions more frequent. The space she occupied in our home began to shrink, while the space she occupied in the corporate world expanded exponentially. I didn't think much of it at first. I was proud of her. We were both ambitious, and I admired her dedication, her relentless drive. This, I told myself, was the price of success. It was a temporary sacrifice for a permanent gain. But the cracks were beginning to show, not in our foundation, but in the everyday moments. They started to show when she began mentioning him. Victor. At first, it was casual, just stories from the trenches of office life, anecdotes from team meetings. Victor said the funniest thing today, she'd tell me. A genuine, easy laugh in her voice as she recounted some inside joke that I couldn't quite grasp. He was a new addition to her team, a rising star. I didn't think anything of it. Everyone needs allies at work, friends to commiserate with. Victor seemed harmless. Or so I thought. But Victor's name started cropping up more and more. He wasn't just a coworker anymore. He was a character in the story of her life, a character with a growing, significant role. He was brilliant, she said, dynamic, a natural leader. She spoke about him with a sparkle in her eye, an energy and enthusiasm that I hadn't seen in a long time. It was the same energy she used to have when she talked about us, and it made me uneasy. One night, as we sat on the couch watching a movie, her phone buzzed on the coffee table. She glanced at it, and a small, private smile touched her lips before she quickly set it face down. I saw the name flash on the screen for a fraction of a second. Victor. What's that about? I asked, my voice a carefully constructed imitation of casualness. Oh, just work stuff, she replied, her eyes not leaving the television screen. She was brushing it off, building the first of many small, polite walls between us. I didn't push it. I wanted to trust her. Maybe I should have pushed. Maybe I should have taken a sledgehammer to that first wall right then and there. But I didn't. Even now, the name leaves a bitter, metallic taste in my mouth. Victor. He wasn't just a name anymore. He was a presence, a shadow looming over my marriage, an uninvited third guest at our dinner table. The first time I'd heard about him, it was harmless enough. Elena had come home one evening, kicking off her heels as she launched into one of her usual rants about office politics. She mentioned him casually, an afterthought. "He's new to the team," she'd said, pouring herself a glass of wine. "Very sharp, though. He's already made a name for himself with the higher-ups." I had nodded along, half listening, my mind on my own deadlines. I was used to Elena talking about her colleagues. It was the background noise of our life together. But Victor's name began to pop up with increasing, and then alarming, frequency. Elena started talking about him as if he were some kind of workplace savior, a corporate messiah. "Victor had this great idea during today's meeting," she'd say, her eyes bright. "He really knows how to motivate people." Or, "Victor managed to close that tough account everyone was struggling with. He's brilliant." At first, I chalked it up to professional admiration. Everyone has that one coworker who stands out, who inspires them. But something about the way she spoke about him, the reverence in her tone, made me uneasy. It wasn't just admiration anymore. It was enthusiasm, a kind of vibrant energy that felt personal, intimate. It was an energy she once reserved for me. The unease deepened when Victor began to creep into our personal life, into the quiet hours after work. Elena would mention him during dinner, or while we were watching TV, sometimes laughing at a joke he had told her, or recounting stories of his bold, confident personality. "He's just so confident," she said one evening, her tone almost wistful. "Confident how?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral, trying not to sound like the insecure husband I was terrified of becoming. "Oh, you know," she replied, shrugging, her eyes focused on the screen. "The way he carries himself. He's the kind of guy who walks into a room and just takes over." I didn't say anything, but the words lingered in the air between us. Confidence. Boldness. I could feel the comparisons she wasn't saying aloud, the unspoken contrast between Victor and me. The first real crack in the foundation appeared when Victor started texting her outside of work. It began as small, seemingly professional incursions, quick questions about projects, team updates. But soon, the frequency increased, the hours grew later. Her phone would buzz late in the evening, and she'd pick it up with that same faint, private smile, her thumbs flying across the screen before she set it down again, face down. "Who's that?" I asked one night, unable to stop myself. "Just Victor," she said, her tone dismissive. "He needed clarification on something for tomorrow." I nodded, but a knot tightened in my stomach. Why did he need to message her so late? Wasn't this something that could wait until morning? The shift became more obvious when Elena's routine, the predictable, comfortable rhythm of our life, began to change. She started leaving earlier for work, claiming she needed to prep for early morning meetings. She stayed later, her excuses always plausible, always related to team pressure, to deadlines, to Victor. "Victor's really pushing us to excel," she'd say, "and I don't want to fall behind." There it was again. Victor. Always Victor. Then came the work events. Elena had never been a fan of the forced schmoozing of networking parties or after-hours gatherings. But now, she seemed eager to attend them, often at Victor's suggestion. "It's important for visibility," she'd say, echoing a phrase I was sure he had used. "Do you want me to come with you?" I asked one evening, as she was getting ready for another one, a team-building happy hour. She hesitated, her back to me as she adjusted her necklace in the mirror. "Oh, you don't have to. It's mostly just work people. You'd probably be bored." I didn't argue, but the casual, easy rejection stung. I used to be her partner at these events, her anchor in a sea of corporate sharks. Now, I was just a potential source of boredom. The final, most glaring change was in her appearance. Looking back, I can see it so clearly. The new outfits. Not just casual clothes, but sleek, tailored, expensive pieces that were clearly meant to impress. Power suits, silk blouses, dresses that were a little tighter, a little shorter than she used to wear. "You've been dressing up a lot lately," I remarked one morning, trying to sound nonchalant as she stood in front of the mirror, a study in corporate perfection. She laughed, a light, dismissive sound. "It's just for work, Mark. You know how competitive my office is. First impressions matter." I nodded, but the knot in my stomach grew tighter. Was it really about impressing her clients? Or was it about impressing Victor? The signs were all there, a constellation of small, troubling changes that I couldn't ignore any longer. Elena wasn't just working late or dressing up for the office. Something fundamental had shifted between us, something unspoken but undeniable. I tried to rationalize it. Her career was demanding. She had always been ambitious. But the more I thought about it, the more the unease gnawed at me. It wasn't just about Victor anymore. It was about what he represented. The growing distance between us. The way her attention, her energy, her very essence, seemed to be drifting further and further away from our life, from me. I wanted to believe it was all in my head, that I was the one who was overthinking things. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. And it was only a matter of time before it all came to a head. The first major red flag, the one I couldn't rationalize away with excuses about work pressure or ambition, came one evening when I glanced at her phone as it lay on the nightstand between us. A notification popped up, illuminating the screen. It was from Victor. The message was brief, just a string of laughing emojis and a single, cryptic word, unforgettable. "What's this about?" I asked, my voice a little too sharp. I held up her phone. Elena's face shifted, a quick, almost imperceptible flicker of surprise that immediately hardened into defensiveness. "It's nothing," she said, snatching the phone from my hand. "We were joking about a disastrous client meeting earlier today. Don't overthink it." Her dismissive tone, the speed with which she shut down the conversation, stung. I didn't press further. At the time, I told myself I was being paranoid. After all, I trusted her. Or, more accurately, I desperately wanted to. But the little things, the small, dissonant notes, kept piling up. Her late nights at the office began to bleed into the weekends, which she now claimed she needed to catch up on work. When I suggested we plan a weekend getaway, a chance to reconnect, she hesitated. "I can't right now, Mark," she said, her voice apologetic but firm. "Victor's pushing the team hard this quarter. It's a make-or-break time. If I don't keep up, I'll fall behind." I stared at her, trying to hide the frustration that was a constant, simmering heat in my chest. "It's just one weekend, Elena. Can't the work wait?" She sighed, a sound of pure, unadulterated weariness, and brushed a stray strand of hair from her face. "You don't understand. It's not just about the work. It's about showing I can handle the pressure. That I'm committed. Committed." The word hung in the air like a challenge, a taunt. And I couldn't help but wonder where her real commitment lay. Things came to a head at the annual corporate gala her company hosted. Elena had insisted I come along, saying it would be good for us to make an appearance as a couple. I agreed, clinging to the foolish, desperate hope that a night of forced glamour and public togetherness might help to bridge the growing, silent chasm between us. The evening started off well enough. Elena looked stunning in a deep, sapphire blue dress that made her eyes sparkle. For a moment, as she took my arm, I felt like we were back in sync, the power couple we used to be. But that feeling didn't last. As the night wore on, I couldn't help but notice how much of her time, her attention, her energy, was focused on Victor. It wasn't just the way they stood so close, their heads bent together in what seemed like a constant, private conversation. It wasn't just the way she laughed at his jokes, a loud, uninhibited sound I hadn't heard from her in months. It was the way he looked at her. Like she was the only person in a room of 500 people. And it was the way she looked back. It made my stomach churn. Later that evening, as we drove home in a tense, suffocating silence, I tried to bring it up. "You and Victor seemed pretty cozy tonight," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. Elena frowned, glancing at me from the passenger seat. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means he was staring at you like you hung the moon," I replied. She rolled her eyes, a gesture of pure, dismissive contempt. "Mark, he's my coworker. That's it. Stop making something out of nothing." But it wasn't nothing, and we both knew it. Even our friends started to notice the tension, the shift in our dynamic. Josh, my best friend since college, pulled me aside one afternoon while we were grabbing a beer. His tone was cautious, but his concern was genuine. "What's going on with you and Elena, man?" he asked. I hesitated, swirling the amber liquid in my glass, unsure of how much to say. "It's complicated." Josh raised an eyebrow, his gaze steady. "Does this complication have anything to do with that Victor guy she keeps talking about?" I froze, my grip tightening around my glass. "What do you mean?" "Just that she brings him up. A lot," Josh said. "You know, when we're all hanging out. It's like she can't stop talking about him. His ideas, his jokes, his brilliance. It's the little much." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. If even our friends, our closest friends, were noticing, how could I keep pretending everything was fine? The final, irrevocable straw came late one night, a few weeks after the gala. I'd woken up thirsty and was heading to the kitchen for a glass of water when I heard her voice, low and hushed, coming from the darkened living room. I stopped in my tracks, my heart pounding in my chest. "No, I can't," she was saying, her tone a mixture of frustration and a strange, soft intimacy. "Mark's here." I stood frozen in the hallway, a silent, invisible witness to a conversation I was clearly not meant to hear. "I know," she continued, her voice dropping even lower. "But it's complicated. I'll figure it out. Okay, I promise." I didn't need to hear any more. The last, fragile thread of trust one had been clinging to, the thread I had been trying so desperately to pretend was a rope, was gone. It had been shattered in an instant. Looking back, I realized I was holding on to a version of Elena that no longer existed. The woman I loved, the woman I thought I knew, had been replaced by someone else, by a stranger who lived a secret life, a life that didn't include me. And Victor, he wasn't just a coworker. He was a wedge, a slow, patient, deliberate wedge, driving us further and further apart. The question was no longer if something was happening. The question was what I was going to do about it. The night it all came crashing down as burned into my memory, a series of high-definition, slow-motion images. It was supposed to be an ordinary evening, a quiet dinner at home after a long day. But something about Elena's demeanor that night felt different. She was more distracted than usual, her eyes constantly flicking to her phone, her replies to my questions short, clipped, and perfunctory. "Everything okay?" I asked, as we sat at the dining room table, the sound of our utensils on the plates the only thing filling the heavy silence. "Yeah," she said, her voice quick, a little too bright. "Just a busy day at work." I didn't push. I had learned that pressing her about work, about Victor, only led to arguments, and I was too tired, too worn down, for another fight. Later that evening, as we were cleaning up, she announced that she had to go back to the office. "Victor needs me to review some last-minute changes for tomorrow's big presentation," she explained, already grabbing her bag from the hall closet. I froze, a dish towel in my hand. "Victor." Of course it was Victor. "Do you really need to go now?" I asked, my voice tight but calm. "Yes," she said, her eyes avoiding mine. "It's important." I watched her walk out the door, a cold, sickening sense of unease settling over me like a heavy blanket. Something about her urgency, about the way she couldn't look at me, didn't sit right. And then it hit me. If it was so urgent, so important, why hadn't she mentioned it during dinner? For the first time in our 8-year marriage, I felt the undeniable, irresistible urge to follow her. I waited a few minutes, my mind a chaotic whirlwind of doubt and a terrible, dawning certainty. Then, I grabbed my keys and headed out into the cool night air. Her office wasn't far, a 10-minute drive. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I would find her car in the parking lot and her light on in her office, and that I would turn around and go home, ashamed of my own lack of trust. But as I pulled into the parking lot of her office building and saw her car parked in its usual spot, my suspicions only grew. The building was mostly dark, a silent, glass-and-steel monolith, except for a few lights on the upper floors. I took the stairs 2 at a time, my heart pounding a frantic, desperate rhythm against my ribs. As I reached her floor, I paused outside the glass doors of her office suite, taking a moment to collect myself. And that's when I heard it. Laughter. Her laughter. And another man's. I pushed the door open quietly and stepped inside. The sound of their voices grew louder as I approached her office, a corner suite with a large glass wall overlooking the city. My mind raced with possibilities. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe they were just working. Maybe I was overreacting. But when I reached the doorway and looked inside, all those possibilities, all those desperate, hopeful rationalizations, shattered into a million pieces. There they were. Elena and Victor. She was sitting on the edge of her desk, her legs crossed, leaning toward him with a playful, intimate smile on her face. Victor stood close, far too close, his hand resting on the edge of the desk, caging her in. Their conversation was casual, their laughter easy, but the way they looked at each other, the raw, undisguised hunger in their eyes, was anything but professional. I cleared my throat. The sound was a harsh, ugly intrusion into their private, intimate world. They both froze, their heads snapping in my direction. "Mark," Elena said, her voice laced with a shocked, guilty surprise. "What are you doing here? I could ask you the same thing." I replied, my own voice a cold, flat thing I didn't recognize. Victor, ever the smug, arrogant bastard, didn't even flinch. He just smiled, a slow, lazy grin that made my blood boil. "We're just working, man," he said. "You know how demanding this job can be." I stepped closer, my eyes fixed on him, on his hand still resting on the desk, inches from her leg. "Working," I said. "Is that what you call this?" Elena stood up, her hands raised in a defensive, placating gesture. "Mark, please. Don't make this into something it's not." I ignored her, my focus entirely on Victor. "You've been crossing lines for months, haven't you?" I said, my voice a low, dangerous growl. "And now you have the audacity to stand here and act like this is normal?" Victor just shrugged, his arrogance infuriating. "You're overreacting. Elena and I, we have a connection, sure. But it's nothing serious." That was it. The last straw. The final, contemptuous dismissal of me, of my marriage, of everything I held sacred. Before I could stop myself, before my rational mind could intervene, I grabbed him by the collar of his expensive, tailored shirt and shoved him against the wall. His smug grin vanished, replaced by a look of stunned, wide-eyed surprise. "Let me make one thing clear," I said, my face inches from his, my voice a raw, ragged whisper. "You don't come near my wife again. You don't text her. You don't call her. You don't so much as look at her. Are we clear?" Victor stammered, trying to regain his composure. "Mark, calm down, this isn't." I didn't let him finish. My fist connected with his jaw, and he crumpled to the floor. Elena screamed, a high, piercing sound of anger and panic, and rushed to his side. I stepped back, my chest heaving, the adrenaline beginning to recede, leaving a cold, desolate clarity in its wake. "Mark, what are you doing?" she cried. I looked at her, at the woman I had once trusted more than anyone in the world, and I felt nothing but a vast, empty expanse of betrayal. "I'm doing what I should have done months ago," I said, turning to leave. "You made your choice, Elena. Now, I'm making mine." As I walked out of that office building, out into the cold, indifferent night, a strange sense of clarity washed over me. The truth was out. The facade was shattered. There was no going back now. And honestly, I didn't want to. I don't remember driving home that night. My mind was a blur of raw, unfiltered emotion, rage, betrayal, and a strange, numbing clarity. The image of Victor, sprawled on the floor of Elena's office, his arrogant smirk finally wiped from his face, kept replaying in my mind. I wasn't proud of what I'd done, of the violence. But I didn't regret it, either. Some things needed to be said, and sometimes, words just weren't enough. When I walked through the front door of our house, it felt eerily quiet, profoundly empty. It was the kind of silence that presses against your chest, making it hard to breathe. I stood in the foyer for a long moment, staring at the smiling photos of Elena and me that lined the walls, snapshots of a life that now felt like a cruel, elaborate lie. I headed straight for the kitchen, poured myself a large, neat whiskey, and sat at the table, my hand shaking slightly as I raised the glass to my lips. The adrenaline from the confrontation was still coursing through my veins, a hot, electric current. Elena came home about an hour later. I heard the door open, her hurried, anxious footsteps, and then the sound of her bag hitting the floor with a thud. She found me in the kitchen, her face pale, her eyes wide with a mixture of anger and fear. "What the hell was that, Mark?" she demanded, her voice trembling. I looked at her, my own expression calm, almost placid on the outside, but burning on the inside. "What was what, Elena? The part where your coworker had his hands all over you? Or the part where I reminded him that there are consequences for disrespecting another man's marriage?" She threw up her hands, pacing the room like a caged animal. "You didn't have to hit him. Do you realize what you've done? He could press charges, Mark. You could lose everything." I laughed, a bitter, hollow sound that seemed to echo in the silent kitchen. "Lose everything? Don't you think I already have? I trusted you, Elena. I trusted us. And you threw it all away. For what? For him." Her expression softened, her shoulders sagging. "It's not what you think," she said quietly. "Don't." I snapped, cutting her off. Don't you dare insult my intelligence by pretending this wasn't exactly what it looked like. You've been lying to me for months. The late nights, the secret texts, the endless excuses. It's all been about him, hasn't it? She sank into the chair across from me, tears finally welling in her eyes. It wasn't supposed to happen, she whispered. Victor, he was there. And I was feeling lost. I didn't know how to talk to you about it. Lost, I repeated, my voice rising with a raw, incredulous anger. You were lost, so you decided to find yourself in the arms of another man? That's your excuse. The argument spiraled from there. Every bottled-up frustration, every moment of doubt and suspicion from the past few months, came pouring out. She tried to explain herself, to justify her actions, but every word she spoke only deepened the wound. You don't understand, she said at one point, her voice breaking. I've been struggling, Mark. You've been so busy with your work, with your own life. And I felt invisible. Invisible, I scoffed. So your solution was to make yourself visible to him? To let him walk into our marriage and take what didn't belong to him. Or to you. She flinched at my words, but I didn't stop. You didn't even try to fix this, Elena. You didn't come to me. You didn't fight for us. You just gave up and let him fill the gap. By the time the argument ended, we were both exhausted, our words drained of emotion. She sat there in silence, tears streaming down her face, while I stared at the wall, my jaw clenched. I need space, I said finally, my voice flat, empty. She looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. What do you mean? I mean I'm leaving, I said, standing up and grabbing my keys from the hook by the door. You've made your choices, Elena. Now, I need to make mine. I packed a bag that night and drove to my best friend Josh's place. He didn't ask any questions. He just opened the door, handed me a beer, and gave me his couch. You want to talk about it? He asked, after a long, comfortable silence. Not yet, I replied, sinking into the cushions, the weight of the night, of the last few months, crashing down on me. Fair enough, he said, sitting down beside me. But just know, whatever it is, you're not alone, man. His words hit me harder than I expected. And for the first time that night, I felt the full, crushing weight of everything I had lost. I had walked out of my own home, left the woman I had loved for 8 years, and taken the first, terrifying step into an uncertain, unknown future. But for the first time in a very long time, I also felt free. Free to think, free to feel, and free to figure out what came next. The first night away from home felt like an amputation. I was a phantom limb, still feeling the presence of a life that was no longer attached to me. The couch at Josh's place was comfortable enough, but I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Elena and Victor in that office, her easy laughter, his smug, possessive smirk. The betrayal cut deeper than I could have ever imagined. It wasn't just about the physical intimacy or whatever else might have happened. It was about the years of trust one had placed in her, the life we had built, a life that now felt like a meaningless, hollow sham. Josh, ever the loyal friend, gave me space when I needed it, but didn't let me wallow for too long. The next morning, he handed me a cup of black, strong coffee and sat across from me at his kitchen table, his expression serious. You've got to figure out what you're going to do, man, he said. You can't let this tear you apart. I know, I muttered, staring into the dark, bitter liquid in my mug. I don't know where to start. Josh leaned back, crossing his arms. Start by deciding what you want. Do you want to try and fix things? Or are you done? The question hung in the air between us, a stark, simple choice that felt impossibly complex. I wanted to scream that I was done, that I could never forgive her for what she had done. But the truth was, a part of me, a weak, stubborn, foolish part, still clung to the idea of us, of what we used to be. Meanwhile, Elena was relentless. She called and texted constantly, leaving a barrage of voicemails filled with apologies and desperate, pleading messages. Mark, please talk to me, one began. Asterisk, I know I messed up. But we can fix this. I still love you. Don't throw away 8 years because of one mistake. Asterisk, one mistake. The phrase made my blood boil every time I heard it. She didn't get to dismiss what she had done, the months of lies and deception, as a single, isolated lapse in judgment. It was a choice. A series of choices. I didn't respond to her messages. Not because I didn't have anything to say, but because I didn't trust myself to say it calmly. The fallout wasn't just emotional, it was social, too. Word of the incident spread quickly, as things like this often do. My sister, Angela, called one evening with an update I hadn't asked for. "People are talking, Mark," she said, her tone a mixture of concern and indignation. "Everyone's got their own version of what happened. Some are siding with you, but others, well, you know how people are." I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "What are they saying?" "Some are saying you overreacted," she admitted. "That you shouldn't have hit Victor. But most people think he got what he deserved. And as for Elena," she trailed off, but I could guess the rest. "She's feeling it, isn't she?" I asked, my voice quieter now. Angela hesitated, then said, "Yeah, her friends are pulling away. And people at work are starting to talk. Victor's reputation isn't exactly helping her case." Hearing that didn't bring me the satisfaction I thought it would. If anything, it just made me feel sad. Sad for the life we had built, for the woman I thought I knew, for the version of us that I had clung to for so long. At Josh's insistence, I started seeing a therapist. At first, it felt strange, clinical, sitting in a quiet, sunlit room with a stranger and spilling out my deepest, most painful thoughts. But Dr. Patel had a way of cutting through the chaos in my mind. "What do you want, Mark?" she asked during our first session. "I don't know," I admitted. "I want to stop feeling this anger, this emptiness." She nodded, her expression calm and understanding. "That's a good place to start. Let's figure out what's at the root of those feelings." Day by day, I began to piece myself back together. I started running in the mornings, letting the steady, rhythmic pounding of my footsteps on the pavement drown out the relentless chatter in my head. I spent more time with Josh and Angela, leaning on them in ways I hadn't before. But most importantly, I started to rediscover who I was, outside of my marriage, outside of the betrayal. Elena's messages continued, each one more desperate than the last. But I didn't answer. Not yet. I wasn't ready. Because this time, the decision had to be mine, and I wasn't going to let her, or anyone else, dictate how my story moved forward. News travels fast in the tight, interwoven ecosystem of a suburban social circle. And when the news is about a marriage imploding in a spectacular fashion, it spreads even faster. Within days, it seemed that our friends and family had formed a council of opinionated judges, each with their own take on what had happened, each with their own verdict. I wasn't sure whether to laugh or cry at the absurdity of it all. Josh, my best friend, my steadfast ally, stood firmly in my corner. "Mark, you're better off without her," he said one evening, as we sat on his back porch, the city lights a distant, glittering carpet below. "If she can't see what she had, that's on her. And don't even get me started on Victor. That guy's got slimeball written all over him." His loyalty was a comforting, solid thing in a world that had suddenly become fluid and uncertain. On the other side of the spectrum was Elena's sister, Rachel. She called me not long after I'd moved out, her voice a sharp, accusatory weapon. "Mark, you've got to talk to her," she insisted. "She's a wreck. She knows she messed up, but you're not even giving her a chance to explain." "She's had plenty of chances to be honest with me, Rachel," I replied, my own voice cold, flat. "She made her choices. Now, she has to live with them." Rachel sighed, her tone softening, shifting tactics. "Look, I'm not excusing what she did. But people make mistakes. You've been together for 8 years. Doesn't that count for something? Not when she threw it all away for someone like Victor," I said firmly. "She didn't just make a mistake, Rachel. She betrayed me. She betrayed us." Rachel had no response to that, and the call ended in a tense, awkward silence. The real chaos, though, came from our mutual friends. Some reached out to express their unwavering support, while others, the ones who had always been closer to Elena, tiptoed around the issue, their conversations laced with a subtle, veiled judgment. Kate, a friend we'd both known for years, cornered me at a party Josh had dragged me to, a party I had no desire to be at. "Mark, I just want to say, I'm so sorry for what you're going through," she began, her voice a low, conspiratorial whisper. "Thanks, Kate," I said, taking a sip of my drink. But she continued, and I knew where this was going. Don't you think hitting Victor was a bit much?" I set my glass down on the counter and fixed her with a steady, unwavering gaze. "Kate," I said, my voice dangerously quiet, "if you walked into your kitchen and found your husband kissing your best friend, what would you do?" She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it, her cheeks turning a bright, telltale pink. "Fair point," she muttered, before retreating back into the crowd. Meanwhile, my sister Angela had gone on a one-woman crusade to defend my honor. "Mark doesn't need this drama," she told anyone who dared to question my actions. Elena and Victor crossed a line, and Mark did what any self-respecting person would have done. If you think otherwise, maybe you should ask yourself how you'd react in his shoes. Her fiery, unconditional loyalty was both heartwarming and slightly terrifying. Even at work, the whispers followed me. Coworkers who had once been friendly now avoided my gaze in the hallway, clearly uncomfortable with the drama. A few, however, approached me with a quiet, understated solidarity. "Hey man," said Brian, one of the project managers, during a coffee break. "I heard what happened. That guy had it coming. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." I nodded, grateful for the support, even if it didn't ease the heavy, persistent ache in my chest. Elena, for her part, was facing her own social fallout. Angela, my ever-vigilant intelligence operative, kept me updated, whether I wanted her to or not. "She's losing friends left and right, Mark," Angela said one evening, a note of grim satisfaction in her voice. "People are starting to realize how shady Victor is. And now, they're questioning why she let him get so close in the first place." "Good," I replied, though the satisfaction I thought I would feel was absent, replaced by a strange, hollow emptiness. The divide among our friends and family only added to the weight of everything. Everyone had an opinion, but none of them had lived it. They hadn't seen the texts, heard the whispers, or felt the gut-wrenching, soul-crushing punch of betrayal. Josh was right about one thing, though. At the end of the day, it's your life, Mark, not theirs, he had said. Don't let their opinions decide what you do next. He was right, but knowing that didn't make it any easier. When Elena reached out again, it wasn't through a desperate, tearful text or a pleading, whiskey-soaked voicemail. It was an email. Formal. Almost detached. The subject line simply read, "Can we talk?" For a long moment, I stared at the screen, my finger hovering over the delete button. I had ignored her previous messages, each one a small, sharp paper cut on my still-healing wounds. But this one felt different. It wasn't emotional. It was calculated. It was as if she had spent hours, days, crafting it. Against my better judgment, against every self-preservation instinct I had, I clicked it open. "Mark, asterisk," it began. "I know you have every reason to hate me right now, and I don't blame you. But I need to see you. Just once. I need to explain, face to face. Please, just give me that chance. Asterisk. Elena, asterisk." I closed my laptop, a familiar, hot frustration bubbling under the surface. What more was there to say? What more was there to explain? She had made her choices. I had seen enough. Still, the email lingered in my mind. Against my instincts, against every piece of advice Josh and Angela had given me, I agreed to meet her. Not because I wanted reconciliation, but because I wanted closure. I wanted the answers to the questions I couldn't shake. We agreed to meet at a small, anonymous coffee shop, a neutral territory where emotions could, hopefully, stay in check. When I walked in, she was already there, sitting at a corner table, fidgeting with her coffee cup. She looked tired, worn down in a way I hadn't seen before. The vibrant, confident woman I had married was gone, replaced by a stranger. "Mark," she said, as I sat down, her voice barely above a whisper. "Elena," I replied, my own voice a cool, distant thing. I leaned back in my chair. "You wanted to talk. So talk." She hesitated, her fingers trembling as she set her cup down. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," she began. "About everything. About us. About what I did." "Good," I said, my tone flat. "Because I've been thinking about it, too." Her eyes filled with tears, but I refused to let my guard down. She took a deep breath before continuing. "I don't know why I let things get as far as they did," she admitted. "At first, it was harmless. Victor was charming. He was exciting. And I thought it was just a work friendship. But then," she trailed off, struggling to find the words. "But then you let it become something more." I finished for her, my voice colder than I intended. She nodded, tears now spilling over, tracing silent, glittering paths down her cheeks. "I didn't mean to hurt you, Mark. I swear I didn't. I was just, I don't know, lonely, lost. I felt like we were drifting apart, and Victor was there. He was paying attention, in a way I hadn't felt in so long. Her words stung, a sharp, painful jab. And instead of talking to me, I said, my voice dangerously quiet, instead of trying to fix what was broken between us, you turned to him. You chose him over us. She flinched at my words, her hands clutching the edge of the table. It wasn't like that. I never stopped loving you, Mark. I made a mistake. A mistake, I repeated, my voice finally rising, the last of my composure cracking. Elena, this wasn't a one-time slip-up. This was months of lying, of hiding things. You didn't make a mistake. You made a series of choices. And each and every one of those choices took you further and further away from me. She broke down then, sobbing into her hands, the sound a raw, broken thing in the quiet coffee shop. People at other tables glanced over, their faces a mixture of pity and curiosity. I didn't care. I waited, letting her cry, until she finally looked up, her eyes red and swollen. I'm sorry, she whispered. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm so sorry. I stared at her, at the woman I had once trusted with everything, and I felt a deep, profound ache in my chest. Not pity, not anger, just a hollow, desolate sadness for what we had lost. You're right, I said finally, my voice quiet, but firm. You don't deserve my forgiveness, and I don't know if I'll ever be able to give it to you. I stood up, throwing a few bills on the table to cover the coffee I hadn't touched. I'm done, Elena. Done with the lies, the betrayal, the pain. Whatever we had, it's gone. And I'm not going to keep hurting myself trying to hold on to it. She nodded, her tears flowing freely now. I understand, she said, her voice a trembling whisper. I wanted you to know how much I regret everything. I hope you figure things out, Elena, I said. But it won't be with me. As I walked out of that coffee shop, out into the cool, indifferent air, I felt a strange and profound mix of emotions. There was sadness, there was relief, and there was a flicker of something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope. Closure hadn't come in the way I expected, but it had come nonetheless. And now, for the first time in months, I felt like I could finally, truly, move forward. When I walked out of that coffee shop, I thought it was over. I thought I had finally closed the chapter on Elena, on our marriage, on the whole sordid, heartbreaking affair. But life, it seems, has a way of throwing in a few final, cruel twists before letting you move on completely. Elena's professional life, the very thing she had prioritized over our marriage, began to crumble shortly after our meeting. Victor, the same man who had wormed his way into her life and our marriage, the man whose charm and charisma she had found so intoxicating, showed his true colors. Word began to spread through her office, through the intricate, gossipy network of the corporate world, that Victor had crossed boundaries with other women, that he had a pattern of using his charm and his position to manipulate those around him. He wasn't just a charismatic coworker, he was a predator. And Elena, it seemed, had been one of his many targets. I learned about it through Angela, who, as always, seemed to have a direct, unimpeachable pipeline to all the latest gossip. She called me one evening, her voice a mixture of indignation and a strange, sisterly pity. Mark, she said, skipping over any pleasantries. Have you heard what's happening with Elena? No, I said flatly, not entirely sure I wanted to. Well, she began, Victor's been outed. A couple of other women at her firm came forward, said he's been inappropriate for months. HR's launched a full investigation, and from what I hear, it's not looking good for him. But here's the kicker. People are dragging Elena into it, too. Dragging her in how? I asked, a knot forming in my stomach. Some of the rumors are about her, Angela said hesitantly. Apparently, Victor's been telling people that whatever they had was mutual, that she was a willing participant. And now, Elena's credibility is shot. I sat there, the phone pressed to my ear, letting her words sink in. On some level, I wasn't surprised. Victor had always been a snake, and it made perfect sense that he would try to save himself by throwing Elena under the bus. Still, hearing it didn't bring me any satisfaction. If anything, it just deepened the ache of everything we had lost. A few days later, Elena reached out again. This time, it wasn't an apology or a plea for reconciliation. It was a quiet, resigned message. Asterisk, I wanted you to know, Victor's been fired. And I'm leaving the company, too. I can't stay there anymore. Not after everything. Asterisk. I stared at the text for a long, silent moment before replying. Asterisk, I'm sorry you're going through this. But you made your choices, Elena. I hope you find a way to move forward. Asterisk. Her response came almost immediately. Asterisk, I'm trying. I really am. Thank you. Asterisk. Hearing about her struggles didn't give me the closure I thought it might. It didn't erase the pain or validate my anger. Instead, it left me with a strange sense of pity. Not for the woman who had hurt me, but for the person she had become. A part of me wondered if she even recognized herself anymore. Victor's betrayal had exposed the cracks in her own life, and now, she was left to pick up the pieces, alone. It was a fate she had chosen, whether she realized it or not. For me, the fallout felt different. While Elena's world seemed to be crumbling, I was slowly, deliberately, rebuilding mine. I wasn't the same person I had been before all of this, but maybe that was a good thing. I was stronger, more self-aware, and more determined than ever to never let anyone undermine my worth again. The scars were still there, of course. Betrayal leaves a mark, no matter how much time passes. But those scars were no longer just reminders of what I had lost. They were proof of what I had survived. And that, I realized, was enough. The day I finalized the divorce, I expected to feel empty, like a chapter of my life had been torn out, leaving me with nothing but blank pages. Instead, I felt a strange sense of relief, as though I had been carrying a weight I didn't even realize was there. Walking out of the sterile, impersonal courthouse, I took a deep, clean breath, letting the cold, crisp air fill my lungs. And for the first time in months, I felt free. Rebuilding my life wasn't easy. At first, the silence in my new apartment was deafening. The walls seemed to echo with the ghosts of my past life with Elena. The sound of her laugh, the way she hummed while she was cooking, even the memory of the arguments that used to fill the gaps between us. But as the days turned into weeks, I began to fill that silence with something new. Myself. Josh had been right when he said I needed to rediscover who I was. For so long, my identity had been inextricably tied to being Elena's husband, to being one half of a perfect couple. Now, I was just Mark. And that, I was beginning to learn, was enough. I threw myself into things I had neglected for years. I started running every morning, letting the steady, rhythmic pounding of my footsteps on the pavement and the crisp, clean dawn air clear my mind. I picked up an old, forgotten guitar that had been gathering dust in the corner of my closet, fumbling my way through chords until a clumsy, hesitant music began to fill the room again. I reconnected with friends I hadn't seen in ages, going to trivia nights and backyard barbecues that reminded me what it felt like to laugh, without reservation. But the biggest change came when I joined that hiking group. Josh had dragged me to one of their meetups, insisting that I needed to get out of my apartment and into the world. At first, I was skeptical, but standing at the top of a mountain, looking out over miles and miles of rolling, green hills, I felt something stir inside me, a spark of life I hadn't realized was missing. It was during one of those hikes that I met Emily. She wasn't flashy or loud, like Elena. She didn't demand attention or try to impress anyone. She was simply kind, a high school art teacher who loved nature and spent her weekends exploring trails and painting landscapes. Our conversation started over a shared laugh about slipping on a muddy path, and before I knew it, we were talking about everything, from books, to travel, to the meaning of happiness. With Emily, there was no pretense, no games. She didn't try to fill the gaps Elena had left. She simply showed me that life could, and would, move forward. One slow, steady, deliberate step at a time. As I sat on my balcony one evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson, I reflected on everything that had brought me to this point. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the anger, it had all shaped me. But it no longer defined me. I was more than what had happened to me. I was stronger, wiser, and ready to embrace the uncertainty of what lay ahead. Meeting Emily hadn't erased the past, but it had reminded me that the future was still mine to create. And as I sat there, the sound of crickets filling the warm, evening air, I realized I wasn't just moving on. I was moving forward. And that, I thought, was the beginning of something beautiful.